So one of the things that we do at this event are a series of short 10-minute stand-ups we call One Great Idea. Well, so you have a series of those over the next 3 days. We're going to do a couple of them right now, and the first one is about, again, something that Sanjan was just talking about the carbon cycle and how some of the really exciting solutions to climate change are right under our feet. Please join me in welcoming from ASU and the movie Carbon Nation, Peter Byck. Peter.
Howdy. My name is Peter Byck. I am a filmmaker, and I made a movie called Carbon Nation. It came out in 2011. It's a climate change, thank you, that one person back there. It's a climate change solutions movie that doesn't even care if you believe in climate change, which worked great for my Uncle Phil. In the film, we were looking for solutions to climate change. Clean energy, energy efficiency were the things that everyone was pushing us towards. But what we learned, actually from a colleague of Sanjan's, is that the soil is really the place to get the carbon out of the atmosphere. We have too much up there. We're not slowing down. How do we get that out of there? And in the soils, the biggest bang for the buck that we found was a thing that we're calling adaptive multi-paddock grazing. So adaptive multi-paddock grazing is emulating the way that herds of bison moved across the Great Plains. The Great Plains, before a lot of us showed up, had the best, most amazing soils ever created on Earth. 10 feet deep, 20 feet deep, amazing amounts of carbon, 10% carbon, 12% carbon. We've lost over half of our carbon on soils pretty much around the planet. And so we want to talk about getting carbon up there, back down here. And so what's happened with AMP grazing is the ranchers will get their cows and steers into a smaller paddock than the area they own, and they'll move them around, sometimes for 2 hours, sometimes for a day, rather than just letting them roam free. And that's the big difference. And a lot of people think that when you have to set up a fence, bring it down, electronic string fence, that it's a lot more work. But there's a fella in our film that we made called Soil Carbon Cowboys who has a different opinion about that.
I'm going out to set up a temporary fence to make a small paddock of 1 acre or less. I can put one up and down 1/4 mile in 18 minutes. I'll put anywhere from 800 to 1,000 head on an acre or half an acre. And I've got more spare time on my hands and I know what to do with. I do a lot of thinking of how to do all these things easier. If I was to start this when I was your age, you know what would have happened? I would have had 15 kids by now because I spent so much time in the house.
That man's name is Neil Dennis, and he's one of my heroes for very many reasons. So let's see here. Got to get our slides going here, gentlemen. There we go. So as we made Soil Carbon Cowboys, which is a short film, I was going into it saying, where's the carbon? Are these ranchers and farmers actually sequestering carbon in the soil? And just that one question led me down this amazing, amazing road where I realized that was the simplest, most naive question someone could possibly ask. And so we've built this team here at ASU with ag universities and USDA agencies and companies from all over the US, some from actually across the ocean as well. And we want to find out answers to a lot of questions that I'll talk to you about right now. But what we want to do is we want to see if we can sequester 1 million tons of CO2 annually on these ranches in the US. And that's the name of the project. And so that's for the first 3 years. The second 3 years, we want to times 10 that to 10 million tons of CO2 sequestered in grazing land in the US. And then we're going to times 10 it again to 100 million tons for the third 3 years. So that's what this project's about. And it's going to ask a lot of questions, and we have a lot of scientists that are going to figure things out. We're going to develop new science, as a matter of fact. So for me, carbon, that's my game. And so I wanted to find out, where is the carbon right now? And in gigatons, billion tons of carbon, the stocks are what you're seeing right there. The ocean's by far the largest, but the second largest by far is the soils. And many, many people don't know that, including agricultural people. And then a big chunk of that carbon that's in soil is actually in pasture land right now. And remember, we've lost over half of our soils already. And so we found one paper comparing conventional grazing, which is where you just let the animals roam freely in a big giant space for a long period of time, with AMP grazing, the herd migration mimicry. And what this paper says is that the AMP grazing sequestered 3 tons of carbon more per hectare per year for the 10-year study. 3 tons of carbon. And so there's 3.5 billion tons of carbon on Earth. If you were able to do that on 1/3 of that, which is huge, but if you were able to do that on 1/3 of the available grazing land, not tearing down a tree, not getting anything other than what is naturally grazing land, you would be able to sequester half of all human emissions. These are big numbers, big ifs, but there it is. There's the number in front of us, and that's what's getting me out of bed every day. And so how does the carbon get down into the soil? It's our good friend photosynthesis. It's that simple. The plant sucks down the CO2, blops off the oxygen, the O2, takes the carbon, and takes the carbon down into the soil. And there's basically 3 pools of carbon in the soil. Days, where the carbon's just going around cycling, growing plants, but not slowing down climate change. Decades, where it's going to stay down there for 10, 20, 30 years. It could give us a leg up as we're developing new energies. And then centuries. And the centuries is actually going to stay down there for centuries, even millennia. And that's what we really want to see. We want to see how much carbon is going down into that deeper pool, because that's going to help remove carbon from the atmosphere. Who's using the carbon? The microbial community down in soil. We know more about Mars soil than we know about Earth soil. It's a brand new frontier. But we do know there's bacteria down there, beneficial. We know there's fungi down there, quite extraordinary. And we know that carbon is the currency. So all that carbon coming out of the atmosphere is going down and making the soils thrive. And when the soils thrive, the plant production thrives, the nutrition thrives. Whatever you're growing out of there, whether you're a vegetarian and you're growing just plants or whether you've got cows grazing it, it's a higher nutritional value across the system. One of the things that we find incredibly important is the life cycle. What is truly going on these AMP grazing systems? Is it truly a carbon sink? So you have to look at the greenhouse gases. And so obviously cows, cattle, steer, they emit methane. There's no question about that. But there's bacteria called methanotrophs that love methane, that eat methane, a lot of methane. On a healthy soil system, there's a lot of the bacteria is eating the methane. We're going to find out about that. We're going to find out if it's a true sink. The nitrous oxide, the CO2, what's coming out of the system, what's going into the system. And then water. Healthy soil is like a sponge. And you'll see that there's grass on top of every shot in our slides, because that's the way it should be. If you see soil without something growing on it, you're seeing a waste. You're seeing really a solar spill. You're seeing wasted sunlight, not feeding anything below the ground because there's no plant there to make it happen. And so, but when that soil is really thriving, it's soaking up every drop of rain. So it doesn't matter how much rain you get, it's how much rain you keep. When you see barren soil, a big rain event, you see a lot of soil erosion. Soil erosion is a huge deal in this country and around the world. And that spongy soil actually holds on to the water. So the rancher and farmer are actually more resilient in drought as well, much more than their neighbors. We're seeing that across the country in a lot of different ecosystems. Another thing that's happening on these ranches that we're seeing that we want to study, I just want to highlight that. These are things we want to study. But what we're seeing, which is giving us the reason that we want to study this stuff, is we're seeing wildlife coming back to these ranches. It's surprising. Ground nesting birds, migratory birds are coming back. The Audubon Society is looking at a badge called bird-friendly beef. Think of that. The hunting on these ranches is better. The ranchers are actually making more money from hunting licenses now. They have an extra income stream. The bugs, the pollinating insects, everything is coming back. It's a thriving ecosystem is what we're seeing. We want to know why. We want to know how. And we want to study the well-being of the animal itself, and we want to study the well-being of the rancher. How are they doing? The ranchers that we've filmed are doing better financially. They're doing better emotionally. The animals are a lot healthier. They're needing much less medication. So we want to study that stuff. So this is the whole system science project that we're working on. Now, as I was making Soil Carbon Cowboys, I was also introduced to a fellow that worked at Shell Game Changer. And we started a project there called Project Meadowlark, which actually happens to be a ground nesting bird, but we didn't know that when we named it. And we said to Shell, if these ranchers are sequestering carbon, and you're spending a lot of money on CCS, carbon capture and storage, what if that same money could also be spent on getting ranchers to adopt these new methods where you'll actually get maybe the same bang for your buck or maybe an even bigger bang for your buck? Now, we've been partnering with Shell for almost 3 years now. They've been an amazing collaborator. And that, wish us luck, because we're getting close to the game where they're going to decide whether they really want to support this large science project. You get 14 scientists in a room, you get their budgets, it ain't cheap. I guarantee you that. So we are looking at closing the carbon cycle. That's the big question. Can you take oil, use it, burn it, emit the carbon, and bring the carbon back into the ground? Can that be done? And that's what we're working on. We're trying to figure that out. And for the folks who do not eat meat, my vegan friends, my vegetarian friends, you still want these animals grazing on your land where you're producing food. The nutrient levels are a lot higher. You can have organic food that's not very high in nutrients. I've seen the fields. You need the livestock who've evolved with the grasslands. This is something that's just, nature's done it. It's a natural engine. It's 2.5 billion years in development. Why not use it? That's what we think. We want to find out if it's true. So our 1 million tons pilot is what we're getting ready to start. It's the whole system science. It's the rancher outreach. That's another piece of it. And it's policy. And everyone knows how boring policy is, so I'm going on. So the last thing I want to say is, how does a healthy system, a healthy ag system, affect your supply chain? You got to tell me this, because we're finding all sorts of things that we've never thought of. How could this make your companies more resilient and a better neighbor and a better steward? And what we really want to do, as my friend George Basile just told me a couple hours ago, is we want to get the carbon back to Earth. Thank you. Thanks, buddy.